She addresses all the gynecological problems without the use of contraceptives. She helps women to address issues with infertility, recurrent miscarriage, and low progesterone. Monique also co-chairs the Downtown Philadelphia 40 Days for Life. I think she's going to advertise that. I see that on her jersey there, which is an outreach, and she's obviously very active in the pro-life movement and very quickly has become one of the key leaders in the Philadelphia area. Her goal in life is to know, love, and serve God in all that she does. During a typical 40 Days for Life vigil, twice per year, Monique spends countless hours in front of abortion chambers in Philadelphia. More than 300 participate, with many of them participating for the first time. Recounting the daily baby saves by Monique and her soldiers are inspiring to us all. She just never quits. Monique has a beautiful conversion story. She recently published it, titled Rising with Roses. This book delves deep into her faith journey, which brought her through a troubled marriage to an amazing and precious relationship with God. It also addresses many interesting life lessons that she's learned along the way and now shares with her patients on a daily basis. Ladies and gentlemen, please give us a warm welcome to a very, very special lady, Dr. Monique Ruberu.
I'm notorious for going over time, so I'm actually starting a timer. What do you want of me, Lord? Where do you want me to serve you? Where can I sing your praises? I am your song. Jesus, Jesus, you are the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, you are the way. I like to start with a little hymn because I truly feel that He's the only way. And our job as being His servant is the only way. My name is Dr. Monique Ruberu, and as Tim mentioned, I am a pro-life, NaProTechnology trained OBGYN. I'm 100% convinced Catholic, and I'm totally in love with our faith. I wish I could tell you that I've always been this way. Sadly, the truth is, although I'm a cradle Catholic, and I was blessed to go to an amazing Catholic university, University of Dallas. I want my children to go to Steubenville, actually. I was a cafeteria Catholic for much of my life, picking and choosing which parts of the faith I wanted to believe and to follow. I was personally pro-life, but I didn't feel that I could impose those views on anybody else. I became an OBGYN physician, and I prescribed contraceptives for several years. I knew nothing about natural family planning except what I was taught during the residency program I attended, which was absolutely nothing. 10 years into my marriage, my husband and I were actually on the brink of divorce. At that time, we had 2 beautiful boys who are playing in the bouncy house. And I had just delivered an adorable little girl who's sitting in the front row. She's my PR person. I can't go anywhere without her. And at that time, I had never been in a scarier or lonelier place. It's often in the depths of despair that God can finally reach those of us who have become lost. He brought amazing Christian people into my life that had fantastic resources. And these resources led me to the truth. They helped me to understand that the only filler of all of my holes was Jesus. With all of the problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis and a crumbling relationship, it was only through his kindness and his generosity that I was able to become whole again and figure out how to approach my marriage in a completely different way. And through that experience, he completely saved my marriage and my family. At that point, I realized that all I really wanted to do with my life from that day forth was to know him, to love him, and to serve him in every aspect of my life. It's interesting how everything in life, I feel, there's no coincidences. He brings people and things into our lives at different times, and only later, looking backwards, do we see how those little instances really played into how our lives were formed and the choices that we made. About 6 months prior to my marriage falling apart, I had picked up a book at our church's lending library. It was Abby Johnson's Unplanned. How many of you have read this or heard of it? About half of you, okay. So this is a beautiful book written by Abby Johnson, who was a director of a Planned Parenthood facility. She was absolutely not a friend of those praying outside of the abortion centers. And she had a drastic conversion when one day she was asked to hold an ultrasound probe for an ultrasound-guided abortion. As she saw the abortion taking place, she was completely traumatized. And because there was a loving and peaceful presence of prayer warriors outside of her abortion center who had tried to reach out to her time and time again, she knew that when she realized she had to leave that facility, they would be the only ones she could turn to. And so she left, and in this book, she talks about the beauty of these people outside of this abortion center, 40 Days for Life. And that was the first time that I had heard of people lovingly, peacefully reaching out to the men and women who go in and out of these abortion centers and not judging them, not screaming at them, not yelling at them, not scaring them, but rather inviting them to make a different choice with love and compassion. In the back of my mind, I thought, gosh, if I ever did pray outside of an abortion center, that would be the way I would want to do it. But I was way too scared to do it during the time that I read this book. However, at the end of all of this turmoil with my husband, realizing that God had really restored our marriage, I was filled with this deep desire to do something more and to do whatever it was that was hardest for me to do. And so I made the decision, because of that book and the seeds planted deep inside of my soul through it, to actually step out and go and pray in front of an abortion center. I'll never forget that day. It was February 1st, 2014. It was the coldest day of the year. I remember my cheeks being frozen so that it was difficult for me to speak. I remember tears pouring down my face as I watched the women in this endless line of cars heading into this abortion center. One of those women actually chose life, and it was such a blessing, but it was so difficult when I thought of all of the babies that were lost that day. Even this morning, I went out there at 6:30, and I prayed again, and sadly, the same situation was happening again. But as I was standing out there on the sidewalk on that first day, I felt that I needed to do something more. So I grabbed a fist of flowers and I stepped off the sidewalk and I started kind of reaching out to these women and trying to talk to them. And it was just such a difficult but important experience to have. And I knew that after doing that day, that was just the beginning and that I had to go back. After we had prayed for a while, a gentleman came up to me, and in general, the people that pray outside the abortion centers, everybody knows each other. And he was like, "Who are you and what do you do?" And I looked at him and I was like, I'm a pro-life OBGYN. And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "What's the big deal?" And he said, "The big deal is we don't ever have OBGYNs out here praying with us. And definitely not OBGYNs who say that they're pro-life." He's like, "My pop sent you." And I was like, "I don't know who the heck your pop is." And then later I found out his father was John Stanton. John Stanton was the founder of the Philadelphia Pro-Life Union. This was a man who spent his latter years praying outside of every abortion center. He started 2 crisis pregnancy centers. He had 12 children of his own, and he would house women in his own home alongside his children. This man had just passed away the night before. And for months and months prior to that day, when he would go for daily mass, he would pray that God would send a pro-life OBGYN to Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, to start a Gianna Center. So naturally, when I showed up and I said, "I'm a pro-life OBGYN," he was probably correct that his father, John Stanton, had played a little bit of a role in asking God to send a pro-life OBGYN. At that moment, I had made the decision to move my family to Dallas because we had family in Dallas and I wanted us to have more support. So his next question was, "Well, this is awesome. So now you can continue praying with us and then you can start a Gianna Center." But sadly, I was still a contracepting OBGYN. I just thought I was pro-life because I realized that the surgical abortions were wrong. But I had no clue how to practice in my profession without the use of hormonal contraceptives. That was all that I was taught in residency. If you have abnormal bleeding, give them a pill. If they have problems with their moods, give them a pill. If they have ovarian cysts, give them a pill. You can alternate it with an IUD now and then, or maybe a Depo-Provera shot, but we learn nothing about how to address these issues outside of the use of hormonal contraceptives. You could cut it out, you could burn it, but the majority of patients you would treat with contraceptives. So when he said, "You're gonna start a Gianna Center for us," I was like, "What on earth is a Gianna Center?" Well, the next day, I explained to him, I said, "You know, Pat, I would love to come and pray with you until I leave in August, but I'm moving to Dallas. I've already got, a school picked out for the kids. I've got a job lined up for me, and all we're looking for is a job for my husband. And he said, whoa, 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 you gotta pray about that. I was like, oh my goodness. All right, at this point in my life, I'm open to praying about absolutely anything. So I will pray about it, but I'm pretty certain that we're gonna be moving to Dallas. So I'll pray with you until we leave. Needless to say, Patrick Stanton's prayer chain is much stronger than mine. This guy had seminarians and nuns and priests all praying that my husband wouldn't find a job. He even went on Holy Spirit radio and he said, I have never prayed for a man not to find a job, but I ask every one of you to pray that this doctor does not leave Philadelphia. One of the ladies in my operating room said, I think they were talking about you this morning on Holy Spirit radio. So needless to say, I'm standing here so we know who had the stronger prayer chain. Nonetheless, when I called him after a month of discerning with my husband, and my husband trying to find a job in Dallas that was perfect for him and not finding it, called him and I let him know, hey, Pat, so we're gonna stay, but this means since we don't have family here, you have to adopt us into your family. So that means like every Christmas, every Easter, every birthday, we anticipate that you're gonna be around. He said, it's no problem. I have so many kids, you can just be another one of them. And he's pretty true to that. But I said, I just wanted you to know we're definitely staying. And he said, I already knew that. I said, how did you know that? He said, well, last night I had a dream and my pop told me that you were gonna stay. I thought that was really freaky, but it's okay. It all works out. The next day after I showed up at 777 Apple Tree, that first time that I went to pray, Pat brought me a book that's actually for sale here on the tables at the Friends of Fertility Care table. And it's called The NaPro Revolution. I had never in my life heard about NaProTechnology. This book blew me away. It was talking about how in monitoring a woman's bleeding cycle, bleeding patterns, and mucus patterns, you can come up with a chart which is done in such a simplistic way. But in analyzing this chart, you can basically tell key things about a woman's hormonal profile. Every type of bleeding pattern leads you to understand whether this woman has adequate amounts of the hormones that she needs to function. So for example, a woman who comes in because of abnormal bleeding, when I ask her just a few questions, how many days do you bleed for? Do you have any spotting before you start your real bleed? Do you have brown bleeding at the end of your bleed? How long is your cycle from the first day of your period to the first day of your next period? When I ask all of these questions, instantaneously I have the ability to understand whether or not this woman likely has an issue with low progesterone, or an issue with her thyroid, an issue with polycystic ovarian syndrome, just based on that tiny bit of information. Then I get a little bit more history. The week before your period every month, do you feel a little bit more irritable? Do you feel a little bit more bloated? Do you have more episodes of crying or sadness? Do you and your spouse or your kids tend to get into more arguments at that time? Do you find that rather than having one cycle a month, you're having maybe 2 in a month? Do you have issues with bowel issues at this time? You know, all of these other little symptoms. And naturally, if she has low progesterone, she'll say yes to everything. Because with this lack of progesterone, her cycles will shorten, she'll have more abnormal bleeding at the end of her cycle, and she'll have raging PMS. What I was never taught during residency is that by supplementing back with 10 days of natural progesterone after she ovulates in the second half of the cycle, we can solve almost every one of those issues. Her cycles will return to a normal length. Instead of having a period every 25 to 27, actually sometimes it's even earlier, 24 to 26 days, she'll go back to having a 28-day cycle. Instead of having prolonged tail end brown bleeding, that will disappear and she'll have a normal length of bleed. Instead of feeling like she wants to kill her husband every month, she'll actually be making him something nice to eat. I've had so many husbands meet me at different conferences and call me on the phone and say, "Thank you for giving me back my sweet wife." It amazes me. Every time in my office, I completely changed my style of practice and the questions that I feel are important to discuss during the interview. One of the most important questions for me is, are you in a relationship? If you're married, how are you doing in that relationship? Are you in a happy marriage? Almost every woman that I meet who is in an unhappy marriage also has severe PMS. When we address the issues with PMS, it naturally helps their marriage. It helps them to be more understanding. It helps their husbands to also understand where some of this frustration is coming from. And when we can treat the woman for the PMS and it resolves, and she's feeling better because she's not bleeding abnormally, she's not feeling horrible, then their marriage naturally improves. The same can be said for many of the other issues that we deal with, women that have recurrent miscarriages. I've had patients who've had multiple miscarriages before they heard about NaProTechnology. And miscarriage isn't always caused by low progesterone. There are other causes as well. But wouldn't it be amazing if the miscarriages that were caused by low progesterone, if those women knew that when we give progesterone treatment during their pregnancy, we might be able to save their children? I have patients who have lost 4 babies, 5 babies, and now they're on their 2nd and 3rd full-term, healthy deliveries. When I was practicing prior to NaProTechnology, I used to meet this kind of woman in my office. And all I had for her was, okay, we've checked all the routine labs, you don't have any blood clotting problems, you don't have any other medical issues that I can address, you can just continue trying. But every time she would achieve a pregnancy and she would lose that pregnancy, I would see her slipping deeper and deeper into this horrible sadness. Having lost one child myself, I completely understand how that feels and how deep that loss is. But now, with the ability to not only address recurrent pregnancy loss, but to help women who have infertility to understand what their cycles are like, what the issues may be, so that we can actually get to the root of the issue and try and address the issue. Most women have no idea that their cervical mucus plays such a huge role in their fertility, that is actually the highway for the sperm. And if they have inadequate amounts of that mucus, something as simple as taking Mucinex over the counter or Robitussin can actually completely change their fertility. With some people, it's as simple as that. But if they've gone through a gynecologist who doesn't know that fact and hasn't had them chart so that they have no idea what their cervical mucus looks like, then they would end up going to ultimately being referred to an infertility doctor, having IUIs to bypass the cervical mucus issue, and then ultimately they might even end up having to experience IVF. Most women have no idea of the true steps of IVF. They don't know that what happens is they take an egg and they take a sperm and they put it together in this petri dish and then they create human beings. If we believe that life begins at conception, then we have to acknowledge that every single one of those little embryos that have been created are human beings. Those are those men and women's children. Then these little human beings are graded, and they say, oh, this one looks better than that, this one's a little bit less good, so let's discard the poorer ones that probably won't survive. So they've already lost a few children in the process before they start anything. Then they'll say, okay, you have 4 good embryos, but we can only put 2 in you at once, so automatically this couple is committed to not just doing this once, but possibly twice. Then they'll place these 2 embryos inside of her uterus, and then if one of these embryos splits into 2, or possibly both do really well and split into 2, then they have up to 4 babies in this uterus. The next question is, oh, you know, if you carry 4 children to term, you're most likely to end up with 4 children who have mental retardation, significant learning issues, significant problems with vision and hearing, and a lot of other problems. You'll deliver closer to 23 or 24 weeks. We don't know if they'll even survive. So you're best off reducing, aborting, killing your children. And we can take care of that for you. So these poor women who just want one healthy child oftentimes agree to reducing. In the process of achieving a pregnancy of 1 or 2 healthy children, how many children do they lose along the way? And then, when they do complete that pregnancy, if they do, they have another 2 embryos sitting in the freezer that then they have to decide, do we have the $30,000 it takes to go through this entire procedure all over again, or do we instead pay for our children to be frozen for many years and then either let them thaw or let somebody else adopt them and have their luck at it? It's a really dangerous situation. And then when you compare that to NaProTechnology, we have women go, they may pay somewhere between $50 to $80 to meet with a fertility care practitioner who teaches them how to chart, gives them all of the charting materials, meets with them over and over every few weeks until they feel super confident with their ability to chart their bleeding patterns, their mucus patterns. After 2 months of charting, they come back and see me so we can look at the charts together. And then we order a panel of blood tests that go throughout the month. Following the blood tests, we have them back so we can analyze the charts as well as the labs, and we figure out specifically what are the issues that we have found so that we can address each one of those issues specifically, all in a completely ethical way that's totally within the confines of our faith. We don't create any life that would be harmed. It's all 100% pro-life. I have so many women who come who feel like they have just been through this IVF system and been this number in the crowd. And it's just like, okay, give me your credit card, next in line, what are your lab results? Okay. There was one patient who, when she went in, she was told by the lady who worked there, so in the thawing of your embryos, one of them didn't make it, but don't worry, you've got 2 more. And straight away, she and her husband began to cry. And the lady was like, "What? Why are you crying? I told you have 2 more embryos." And she was like, "You don't get it. We just lost a child." And the lady really didn't get it. In her mind, these were not children. These were cells. They didn't look like children. But those of us who understand that life begins at conception understand that even we started as embryos, and that every bit of genetic material that we have in our body was already present within that embryo. And that we didn't change or morph into some other creature along the way, but we just needed time and nurturing to develop into what we are today. So we respect that life in every stage, from conception until we enter into the kingdom of heaven, God willing. But for this woman, she didn't get it. So I'm happy to say, within a NaProTechnology office, things are very different. Women's concerns can be heard. We address so much more than just a bleeding issue or an issue with ovarian cysts or polycystic ovarian syndrome or anything else. We try and approach the patient in a much more holistic way because we have an understanding that this woman is not just her uterus or her ovaries, but if she has a strong faith and if she has a strong relationship in her life, her immune system will naturally be so much stronger, and then she will be able to navigate through all of life's twists and turns and ups and downs with ease and grace. But if her relationships in her life, the most important relationships, her relationship with God, her relationship with her spouse, if those are crumbling, no matter what we do for her medically, she is likely not going to get much better. Because with sadness, her immune system will not function as well. It'll be so much easier for her to succumb to depression and anxiety. So in my office, we feel it's super important to address all of those aspects. Personally, for me, I feel like NaProTechnology has been such a blessing. It has allowed me to practice my faith in every aspect of my life. I'm called primarily to be a wife and a mother, and then my next responsibility is to work in this office, at least like the fact that I said mother. It allowed me to work in this office and to take care of my patients, and then lastly, to participate in the pro-life movement and to help with 40 Days for Life and Sidewalk Servants outreach. But without NaProTechnology, none of this would be possible. I thank God especially for Pope Paul VI, because it was within his encyclical, Humane Vitae, that he called men and women of science and physicians to do something different. He called us to find new ways, to do the research, to do the work that would lead to this understanding. And that's exactly what Dr. Tom Hilgers did in starting NaProTechnology. You know, when he was a medical student and Humane Vitae came out, he went to his chaplain and he said, hey, you know, I heard this new encyclical is out. I'd really like a copy of it. Can you get one for me? And his chaplain said, why would you want to read that junk? And that made Tom Hilgers really want to read it. So he went out and he found a copy and he read it and he absorbed it. And being a medical student, I mean, the lowest level on this medical chain, he made a decision at that moment in his life that he was going to follow this call. He began, as a medical student, to do research on the Billings method, to see if it really worked or not. And it was that research which led him to understand the patterns and how they related to different disease processes in gynecology, and to be able to not only use the Billings method to achieve or avoid pregnancy, but rather to address every gynecologic concern without the use of contraceptives. His work has now spread throughout the world. You can find NaProTechnology doctors in almost every country. And we're so blessed in Philadelphia to have not only me, but also Dr. Delia Larari, who has come. And I know in speaking to medical students that more are on the way. We actually have a seminarian currently, Tucker Brown, who is planning on becoming a family medicine doc, but instead decided to follow the call into the priesthood. He is the trifecta. He's a priest who is also a man with medical knowledge, who also is trained in NaProTechnology. I can't imagine a better person to have in your parish. So God has really blessed our community in so many ways by bringing this here. And over, I meet people just randomly. I remember when I was pregnant and I was getting a lot of blood drawn, the person who was drawing my blood told me that she was trying to conceive, and I was like, oh, wow, have you ever heard of NaProTechnology? She was like, no, I've never heard of it. And now she's one of my patients. So like that, I mean, just randomly, everybody that my patients meet, everybody that I meet, everybody that, you know, comes to a talk like this, or their parents come, or their aunt comes, or somebody comes, the word about this is spreading. And especially in our society where everybody is trying to do the most organic thing and the most natural thing, and they're all shopping at Whole Foods and spending tons of money, you would think they would see the value in taking care of their fertility and trying not to cover up all of these issues with hormonal contraceptives. Most people don't realize They'll say, well, but according to the Catholic Church, it's okay to use contraceptives if it's for a medical issue, right? The thing is, in using any hormonal contraceptive, you better be abstinent, because the backup mechanism of every single hormonal contraceptive is to thin the inner uterine lining, the place where the baby implants. When you're taking either a contraceptive pill or if you have an IUD in place, it doesn't always prevent ovulation. It's like Russian roulette with the pills, because sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But with the IUDs for sure, it doesn't prevent ovulation. So with IUDs specifically, and sometimes with the pills, you will have the release of an egg which can meet up with a sperm, create an embryo, a baby. That baby will roll down the fallopian tube and try and implant in this lining, but the lining is inhospitable. So then that baby will unfortunately experience an abortion, completely unintended by the mother and the father, but they've never been told that this is even a possibility. So when I have people come to my office and they say, oh, wow, I have an IUD in, I'll say, do you know how it works? And when I explain all of the mechanisms of action of these either contraceptive pills, IUDs, Depo-Provera, you name it, then they're like, oh my gosh, no one ever told me. Like a few months ago, I had a really heavy period and it was so strange. Could that have been an abortion? And we'll never know. But why take the chance? Especially in people who want to follow their faith. They are personally pro-life. They don't want to abort their own children. Why not learn a method which will last you throughout your fertility? People will say, oh, but I have irregular cycles. Then this is perfect for you. Because in charting, you will know your fertility every single day. And then you can discern on a month-to-month basis whether or not you want to be open to life or if you want to postpone a little further. The entire time, you are still being open to God's will. It's such a beautiful thing, and I was sharing with one of my patients the other day. I have patients that come to me sometimes and I'll say, so are you guys currently trying to achieve pregnancy or trying to avoid pregnancy? Oh, we're trying to avoid pregnancy. What method are you using to try and avoid pregnancy? Oh, we're using natural family planning. Oh, that's awesome. What method natural family planning are you using? Oh, withdrawal. That's not natural family planning, actually. When I explain to my patients, when I was talking to my husband about natural family planning and the concept of not going with withdrawal, what I told him was, I believe that God created every cell in your body, and I want to honor every cell in your body. So when we come together and we make love, I want to honor even those cells. And the only place that those cells can be honored is in my uterus. I don't want them to be in a trash can. I don't want them to be discarded somewhere else, because I love you that much, and I want to honor you that much. He was blown out of the water. I said, if you explain it to your husband in that way, then he will look at it in a completely different way. And he will understand, the moments when you come together, you can actually stay together and really enjoy that bond rather than someone getting up and running away to go clean up or whatever. But it's a beautiful, amazing experience that really honors one another and honors God. And it changes everything. When I talk to them about the effects of spermicide and how this is a chemical that they use to kill sperm. So how can that be good for the most delicate part of your body? They're like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. So if people just stop and they think about it, and especially if they're trying to live this organic life and avoid cancer and everything else, natural family planning makes so much sense. It's cheap, it's easily accessible, it's organic, it's amazing. So I am so blessed to be able to use this in my office, to be able to share this with all of my patients, to be able to address every GYN issue using it, and to be able to fully practice my faith on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much for all of your time and your attention. It was such a pleasure to be able to come out and speak with you all today. This is my book, Rising with Roses. I have a few of them with me today. It's a really short read. It's really, I think Tim summed it up really well. It's my experiences with my patients as well as my conversion story. And I enjoyed writing it, so I'd love to share it with you. It's available on Amazon as well, but it's cheaper when you buy it in person. So if anybody wants it, it's here today. Thanks again. Take care. God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you, Dr. Monique. The conference is titled Family Fully Alive, and that's exactly what Monique gave us there in that beautiful talk. Thank you, Monique, for all the women that you've helped, for all the babies you've saved, and for your witness to the truth. Thanks so much for being here today. And Pat Stanton was right. We need you now more than ever.